Welcome to this episode of First Home Hustle. I'm Kim McCarty.
And I'm Dave Stahl.
All right, so today we're going to talk about legal documents that you sign as a buyer in the transaction.
So we're going to talk about what's binding and what's not binding.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So in the beginning of the process, as a real estate agent, what documents do you send or have a buyer sign that are binding?
So we actually have not only your buyer rep agreement, right? The buyer rep agreement says that our brokerage and me are going to represent you in this transaction. It also says what areas we're going to help you look for a house. It does have a commission on there. And what many buyers don't understand is that commission is built in there for a couple different reasons. The seller is not required to pay the broker's fee. And if you've watched any of the news lately, you have seen the lawsuits that have happened because the sellers felt that they were required to pay the broker's fee. So now it is becoming more apparent that the sellers are not required. Now, sellers are still going to be probably paying the broker's fee because they want to get the most exposure that they can for their home. So that's typically what we're going to continue to see. But that commission is put into that contract on the off chance that the buyer finds a for sale by owner.
So when does somebody usually, with an experience, if they're working with an experienced agent, when do they normally see that representation agreement?
It is the very first thing that we sit down and talk about. So if you call me and say, hey, we want to buy a house, you're coming into the office and we are having a face-to-face meeting and we're going to go through that paperwork then.
So that should be far in advance of putting an offer on a property.
100%.
Okay.
Like this is the initial conversation that we're going to have, and we're going to go through that buyer rep agreement, what it all spells out, and on the off chance that you do find a for sale by owner, how are we going to back in that commission so that I get paid and my broker gets paid? And then also, what if you end up going rogue on me, right? So let's say you go rogue on me and I've got a 6-month buyer rep agreement and I find out through the grapevine that you went and bought a house with X, Y, and Z agent. Well, now I have a legal document that says, hey, I was helping you. We'd already looked at all these houses. I actually am due a commission. So we go through that, and I spell that out very clearly in my talk with them. There's also a form that is required that agents must present to them in their first initial meeting, which is called an IABS, which is basically that spells out there's a buyer's agent, seller's agent, and what we call an intermediary. And an intermediary would basically say, we're going to go looking at houses that may be listed by Keller Williams Allen agents where we are. That would put us into an intermediary.
Okay.
So that is a required document. And the other required document that they have now added, and they've added it in our brokerage, is the wire fraud. And that's an important document. So this is a document that I stop and really talk about, is the importance of not wiring your money when you get that email, because fraudulent people know that, hey, lenders, real estate agents, title companies are all in communication with this particular buyer, and they will believe, hey, for tomorrow's closing, wire your money to X, Y, and Z, and it may not be the right place. So we have that conversation as well in our initial meeting. So those are the 3 really required documents that I go through and get them to sign at our initial meeting. I don't go show houses until we have these sit-down conversations.
Okay. Would you say that all agents do it that way?
No. I would tell you that probably less than 50% do it this way, and probably even less than that. And the reason is they're scared to ask for the business.
So the ones who don't present at the beginning, when do they get it?
Typically when they write the contract.
Okay, so it's in there with like 50,
all the other paperwork.
50 other pages
It's
of
buried.
stuff, and it's buried, and
And then
now
the
they
buyer
don't have to
doesn't
explain it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where buyers don't know what they're signing, because they're signing a contract, and then this is buried down in that contract, and they don't even realize that they just signed a year-long buyer rep agreement. The other thing I do when I have this conversation is I typically do take a 1-year buyer rep agreement instead of a 6-month, especially if I know, hey, we got 3 months just to get ready. We've got this, we got that. The reason I take that is so that I don't have to go back and extend it renew it, whatever. But I tell them up front, if you want to fire me, you can fire me. You just have to call, give me the reason that you're firing me. But if I've already shown you 100 homes, I'm going to list all of those homes. And if you buy any of those homes, you will pay me the commission.
Mm.
So
because I've been doing this a long time, so have you. Do you think electronic signatures make it so that people read less or more of the stuff they're signing?
100% less.
So it's important that if you're working with an agent or a lender, that maybe this stuff does get separated so that you don't feel like you're just signing something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I like to have that initial buyer meeting. You know, I was probably like the majority of other agents back in the day where I didn't have that sit down conversation and meeting. And I decided if they don't have 30 minutes to come sit down with me and talk with me, I don't have the 8 months to spend helping them find a house.
Right. Right.
I think it's just a vital meeting. So for a buyer out there, if you're not willing to devote 30 minutes to an hour and sit down with the agent that you're going to choose to help you find that house, then you probably are not serious.
So what other, outside of those 3 documents along the way, what other documents do they sign with you that are like legal and binding?
The contract, of course. Once we
Okay.
find the house, the contract. So even if I'm docu-signing that, I typically will say, I'm going to send this to you. When you get it, call me. We're going to go through it line by line. Or if it's a first-time buyer and I really like to sit down with them, bring them back to the office and go through it all and have them initial everything in front of me so they understand. But if we can't, and in today's, technical age, they all want to sign it electronically. I get it, but I still make them call me and go through it line by line. Now, of course, I have buyers that have been seasoned for years. They're like, got it, read it. I don't have any questions. But first time, yeah, we're going to go through everything line by line so they understand, hey, this is the earnest money. This is the inspection period. This is how much time we have to get all of this turned in so that we don't miss any of that in that conversation. So that's going to be their biggest legal thing that they sign is going to be that
The
contract.
contract. Okay.
The second thing they're going to sign is going to be the seller's disclosure, just that the seller's disclosing what they know is deficient or working, not working. And then they're going to sign if there's a homeowners association, a lender, if they're going to be getting a loan, we're going to sign parts of that part of the contract. So
Okay.
those are the binding things. The
Okay.
biggest thing in all those is just the contingencies of the dates, making sure we don't miss, turning in our earnest money, turning in our option, getting our inspection done. If we want to back out, what are all of our contingencies to back out? When do we need to have our loan done? Those are the important things that we're constantly watching and monitoring.
Okay.
Okay,
That's
so
not-
for
that's
you,
and I hate this, but there's nothing legally and binding with a lender until you get to the closing table.
really,
Really.
I didn't know that.
I cannot have somebody go, Dave, we're using you, and if we use somebody else, you're going to get paid for all of your efforts.
Okay.
Doesn't work that way. So, and a lot of people don't know this. They get an initial set of disclosures that it's like 40, 35, 40 pages. Nobody walks through and explains the disclosures.
Right.
They should.
Right.
And that's kind of why it made me ask the question about electronic signatures, because back in the day, I would send somebody a PDF packet or have them come into the office, and we'd go through
And sign
every
page.
page.
Yeah.
And if there was an error on a document, very easy, change it in my computer, reprint that page. These days, with everything being electronic signatures, people don't read 99% of it. They'll look and make sure their name and social match up, and some of them don't even do that.
Right.
So for me, there's nothing legally binding until you actually get to the closing table. Now, there are places along the way that we can go, hey, you're committing fraud, and then that's a legal issue in and of itself.
Right.
But as far as the documents being legally binding, there's nothing legally binding until you sit down and sign documents at the closing table.
Interesting. So, how do you think you keep people with you from start to finish?
Sometimes on a shoestring.
Okay. Okay.
Because there's so many things that can happen along the way that kind of, it's all based on trust,
Yeah.
right? So in the conversations we have initially are really a deep dive into what people are trying to accomplish and why, and then you're putting things together that make sense for their situation. And if you're not listening and paying attention, it's very easy for somebody to go, I like that guy better.
Yeah.
Or I like that program better, because it's not been explained to them which one's the most beneficial for their situation. So
Right.
for me, it's everything is based on trust. So the disclosures that we send out, they got to be right.
Yeah.
Because I can't be calling everybody and go, hey, I'm sorry, the documents are always wrong, but we'll fix them eventually.
Yeah. It's not a good look.
Right, because there's nothing, like I said, nothing legally binding until you get to closing.
Okay.
And, I see it all the time when I'm trying to compare things for people. And I'll do it. Send me everything else that you've gotten. We'll look at all the programs that you've looked at and figure out which one's the right one. And there are so many of them because there's nothing legally binding except for the lender's fees when you send them. Those can't change.
Right.
But if somebody decides to tell them property taxes are different or insurance is different or, fees from the title company or survey or, all these numbers are different and, do what we call lowballing the numbers.
To make it look better.
It looks better. And they're like, oh, I want to do that because it looks better. Well, at the end of the day, it all plays out. It's going to be what it is.
Well, and by the time that all happens, you're like 3 days from closing.
Oh, yeah. You're knees deep. You're done.
Yeah. You don't have time to change that.
Right.
Okay.
So, there's certain things that can change and certain things that can't change. And I think that there's some lenders who play in that gray area of, oh, I know this can change later, just to get somebody
Just
on
to get the
board.
deal. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, those of us who have been around for a while, we understand that it's not just this deal, it's every deal that comes after that.
100%.
And, gaining the trust of people, their families and, age and everybody in there. So, as far as what we do, the only thing is legally binding is what you sign at closing.
Okay. So for you, it's just making sure that you maintain the relationship during the time they call you, till the time they go under contract and beyond. Because even if they go under contract, I know that I've had listings where the buyer switches at the 11th hour, their lender, and now we're scrambling to get new appraisals or whatever.
Right.
It can always be, a crapshoot sometimes, if you will. Like if I have a listing where I get two different lenders, they're going to use my local lender, but I have a Bank of America approval. I know 100% they're not going to use the local person, right? It was the agent just trying to get me to believe that they're going to use the local one.
Right.
So I personally did not know that there is no reason that they could jump ship with you. I mean,
They could do it at any time.
so you have nothing that they could sign. Your
I
industry,
could, but it's not legal.
right? Your industry doesn't have anything.
Right. Now, on commercial lending, I could do something like that, but I can't do it on residential.
Do you think that's something that they'll change?
No.
Okay.
No, the CFPB, that's the abbreviation, right? Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Okay.
That.
Okay.
It's not allowed.
Okay.
So on the agent side, legally
Yes.
binding documents prior to even coming into a contract.
Yep.
On the lender side, nothing legally binding until you get to closing.
So for you, your relationship with realtors is probably the best part of getting them to stay with you, because the relationship with the realtor helps you stay in the door.
Right. And relationships with
Past clients.
their family,
Yeah.
past clients, stuff like that. That's important too. And I've had it where somebody's just like, Dave, your deal's not the best deal, when in fact it was. And
Yeah.
but there's nothing
The smoke and mirrors.
right.
Yeah.
There's nothing that binds them to do the lender's deal until you get to closing.
Right. Okay.
And,
So
and even on that's only on a purchase,
Right.
And that's only in Texas. There are some days where on a purchase there's a right of rescission. So
Right.
in Texas, you sign,
you're done.
everything's recorded electronically. You're done. There's can't get out.
Right.
Okay. On a refinance, you have a 3-day
3
right of
days.
rescission, meaning that you refinance, 3 days go by, the fourth day after that, your loan funds and it's done. So up to midnight of that third day, you can go, I'm out.
I changed my mind.
Nothing legally binding until everything's finalized.
And some states are that way as well as in purchases.
Some states do that on purchases too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think New York does something similar to that. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
that-
know. I just know
that's
that New York is some.
that's why I have a good database of loan officers to refer
Yeah.
people to.
Because I think New York's a little different too. I know their agents have to go through attorneys too, so it's definitely
Yeah.
different. So
Every state's a little different, and that's why it's great that like folks like you and folks like me have a network of people. So
Yeah.
if somebody comes to us in a different state that we don't do business in,
we can
that
refer.
we can refer them out to.
So what do you think the takeaway from today was when it comes to the legal documents?
Slow down.
Okay.
Read what gets sent to you, because if you're not reading it, I mean, holy cow.
Yeah.
You could be giving something away that you're not aware of that you're giving away.
100%. And you may be signing something that I know that we had a conversation, like you had a borrower that was kind of jumping around from different agent to different agent, not realizing that she had signed a buyer rep agreement. And even after she was explained that she had signed this, she was still bumping around. So, I think it's important if agents aren't having these conversations, they need to, shame on them. They need to be having these conversations. But buyers, beware of what you're signing.
Right.
And know and be educated.
Especially a first-time buyer. If you have the
100%.
opportunity to sit down with your lender or the real estate agent to sign the documents in person instead of electronically, you should take that opportunity, because you need to understand what you're signing.
Yes. Awesome.
Like if you submit a loan application that the data is incorrect,
Right.
you might get declined or approved initially
Right.
without actually knowing that it's real.
Right.
So it's important that they, as a first-time buyer,
That we're
and
sitting
even
down.
a second and third-time buyer, you should still look at everything.
Right.
Look at what you're signing,
Right.
and if you can do it in person,
Do
I
it.
would recommend doing it in person, because at least then somebody can explain to you what you're signing.
Well, and if you're in person, you can decide right then and there, I really don't like you, or
Right.
we're not jiving, not a
Right.
good fit. And
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
Let's not waste anybody's time.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
Absolutely. So
All right. So if they want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
972-896-8790.
And we're at 214-662-9308. And remember, if you want to buy a house anywhere in the U.S., we can hook you up with the right lender and the right real estate agent.